I'm John Dwyer from the University of Queensland. I'm a plant ecologist and senior lecturer at UQ in the School of Biological Sciences.
And I'm an honours student working with John. My project centres around Oxley Creek Common and a series of plantings that were done about 3 years ago. And I'm looking at a weed treatment here and how that affects the growth and survival of these existing trees that were planted.
Oxley Creek Catchment Association had a big 20 million trees project awarded to them to put in here, and I guess the idea of that was to try and reinstate a corridor of riparian vegetation on this side of the track. The creek's down there if you can't tell, and Hugh Possingham asked Luke Shue and I if we would talk to Phil and Chris about what we might be able to do with that planting. And one thing that Luke and I are very passionate about is incorporating experiments more into restoration to try and learn from restoration. Every time you go and plant a bunch of trees in a particular place, it's an opportunity to learn something. So we spoke about implementing an experiment, and that's what we're standing in one of those plots now. We came up with 20 plots along the corridor and two mixtures of species. One mix that is, I guess, the faster species that are trying to get in here and get quick site capture. And we're standing in one of those plots now. Things like Acacia calyx, red cedar, Goya, Alphitonia, the fast growing things. And then the plot next door, we've got some of the sort of hardier things. They tend to be slower growing, but they're the species that we expect to cope better with drought and other stresses. So we've got these two mixtures repeated all the way along the corridor, and that was established in November 2016. Now sadly, when that was being planted, Brisbane was experiencing one of its hottest Novembers on record, and so the planting suffered some pretty high mortality. Just under half of the plants survived the first month or two, and that's telling for a number of reasons. First of all, it sort of revealed to us that we need to, get smarter about restoration, have more flexibility in our programming. If it is going to be too hot, how can we potentially delay the project? It turns out that's really hard with the way we do restoration in Australia. So it's good for us. It's a new avenue of research for us to look into. But from Oxley's point of view, we're still left with lots of trees. We planted 7,000, the royal we, and we've still got many thousands of trees here. So that's a fantastic outcome, and this is in one of the better plots here. So we've continued to monitor the growth and survival of every one of those 7,000 trees. Obviously the ones that didn't survive, we no longer monitor them. And it's really revealed some useful information. So first of all, with that initial heat stress, we've learned that you don't want to put seedlings in that are too big. You don't want to put seedlings in that are too small. There was a bit of a Goldilocks zone for survival. It was about 35 centimetres. And it was sort of across species, there was a general trend. That's because seedlings that are too big have got too many leaves for their root system to support that heat shock. Seedlings that are too small don't have well-developed root systems. So that's useful information. But there were some species as well that tanked, and my advice would be to avoid those species or put them in later rather than planting them out in an open paddock situation like we did originally. So there's useful information. We learned there was evidence of planter fatigue in that. So there were, on the hottest planting days, if plants were planted in really hard soil, they had a much lower survival probability. So there's some really useful information that you get from having people like Julian and former honours student Ronnie Gardner monitor every tree, track every tree for an extended period. You can learn some lessons. And then moving forward, we're left with a situation where grasses have sort of recolonised the plots. And this is a really common outcome for restoration in Australia. People underreport these sorts of outcomes. People love to talk about the wonderfully successful projects, but this underreporting is problematic, and we're not ashamed of the outcome. We think it's a great opportunity to learn. And so I guess I'll hand over to Julian to sort of address what his project's going to be. Is it worth intervening to try and give these trees some freedom from the grass once the grasses have re-established?
Yeah, so I guess anyone who's been to Oxley in the past year would notice that this grass, this really invasive grass called Rhodes grass, has invaded the plots, as well as a few other things. And I guess what that's done is that one of the reasons this is so bad is that it's, I guess, stunted the growth of a lot of the plants we put in the ground. And so what we've done is we've applied, I guess, a weed control treatment on half of the plants in each plot, so we can compare the outcome of the treatment. And that's involved firstly brush cutting the grass around each stem, and then applying a herbicide. And on top of that, we've also put a 1 meter squared jute mat around each plant, because our prior experience at this site shows that just brush cutting isn't enough, and neither is applying herbicide, because the grass will just come up within a matter of weeks or months. And so at this stage we're monitoring all the stems that have been treated as well as the untreated stems, and we're looking at whether that's, I guess, affected or allowed them to have increased growth over this period, and whether that's affected survival as well.
We're also tracking the cost and the effort that it takes to do that intervention. And one of the potential outcomes is that it's not worth it. And that doesn't mean that the experiment didn't work. It actually means the contrary. It means it's really useful information but it might mean that we get some benefit. And then we have to make decisions about whether it's worth the investment in time and money and labour for that, if it's a small benefit, or hopefully it's going to be a large benefit. But we're actually in one of the treated areas now, and things look pretty good here.
Yeah.
But we let the data do the talking.
Yeah.